Hi, and welcome to We Need to Talk with Micah and Shivani. I'm Micah,
I'm Shivani.
and we're your hosts for today's podcast. So, Shivani, I am so excited to be doing this with you. We've been friends for nearly 5 years, and we have really good conversations. So, I feel like it's going to be rather natural to shift our, conversations into a podcast.
I agree completely. 100%. Like every time we talk on the phone, like literally every single time, and we'll talk for hours and hours, and every single time, both one of us or both of us will be like, this literally could be a podcast episode. Like we're talking about the things that like people talk about on podcasts and stuff. So I really feel like it's only natural that we do something like this. And obviously, like I enjoy my conversations with you immensely, and I love talking to you. Like you're one of my favorite people to talk to. So, I feel like there's nothing more enjoyable than doing something like this for me either. Like it really doesn't even feel like I don't know, we're literally doing anything. Like I would do this anyway. So I agree completely. And I'm really happy that we're doing this. I'm really glad that we are doing this. It's something that I'm definitely very excited about. Um, and so, yeah. And maybe I'll just start off by telling people a little bit about what the episode is about. And then I think, some introductions are probably in order, seeing as this is our first episode. I don't think, most of our viewers really know anything about either of us. But yeah, so for the first episode, like we thought that it would be cool to just talk about what life has been like for both of us after college, just kind of our post-college experiences. And I think that we could go in really a lot of directions with that. Kind of we've talked about like, how maybe we've struggled to find meaning in certain areas of our life after college, or how our relationship with our career and our professional goals has changed a lot over the years. And, even relationships in general, loneliness and making friends as an adult, stuff like that. So I feel like there's so much that we could talk about, but that's generally kind of what this podcast episode is going to be about. Um, but before we get into that, let's do quick introductions. I'll start with mine. So, my name is Shivani. I am 24 years old. I am from California, originally from California. I did go to Texas for roughly 4 years for undergrad, and then I was working in New York for like a year, but I am back in California now. I love it here. I really don't think I'm ever leaving again. And yeah, so that's a little bit about kind of me. And I was pre-med in undergrad, and then I was doing some other stuff, but now I'm studying for the MCAT again, and I plan to go to medical school, so I am on the medical track as of now. And that's a little about me. Micah, feel free to tell everyone a little about yourself.
Okay, yeah, so I'm Micah. I am from Texas, grew up there, went to college there. That's where I met Shivani. And I currently live in Los Angeles. I actually moved to San Jose for a year right after graduation. Now I live in Los Angeles and I work as a software engineer. And yeah, I'm sure there's more about me that I'll get into. I mean, this podcast is just about us. So you'll learn more about me. But
Definitely.
okay. So should we
Definitely.
get into a first
Mhm.
question?
Sure. Yeah. I was thinking we should maybe just start with you and go from there. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about how life has been for you after college. And yeah, we could just start from there probably.
Okay, yeah. So life for me has been a lot different post college. I'm not exactly sure where to start, but I'll just start with I moved to San Jose directly after graduating, and I graduated from college 2 or so years into COVID, and being in Texas, honestly, I didn't feel that COVID restrictions were just super intense by that 2 year mark. But when I moved to San Jose, I was kind of surprised how everything near me, at least, was shut down and a lot of businesses were closed. And so it was very difficult for me to meet people, especially because whenever I attempted to do meetups, you weren't allowed to socialize with people in groups six or more. And even with work, my job ended up going fully remote, and so I actually struggled a lot with, I guess, just social isolation, and that kind of surprised me because I would say I'm a very independent and relatively introverted person, and I really love my alone time. So even in college, when COVID first hit, socially, it didn't have that much of an impact on me because I loved being alone. I had a cat, had my dog, eventually got a cat, and I was able to still work. I was able to do my studies. I loved being alone. But anyway, post college, moved to San Jose. Um, I should also mention that when I was an undergrad, I loved school. And I just really loved my studies. And so I think post college as well, not having those constant pressures to meet was pretty difficult for me. And so when I started my job, I had a bunch of new free time, and I didn't really know what to do with my life because I knew that I would not go to grad school for at least 3 years. And so I knew that I was going to be working. But I think that kind of it was just, I was in a very ambiguous time, and I'm still in somewhat of an ambiguous time, but I know what I'm going to do for my future now.
Honestly, yeah, there's so much there that I relate to 100%. Like, and I think, probably a lot of people could relate to this as well. Like people who, especially like growing up, who are, perform highly when it comes to school and academics and stuff like that. And then, graduating and then being in the real world all of a sudden. I think that's exactly why it could be a really hard transition because it's like a lot of your meaning in life comes from, doing well in school and a lot of your self-worth, at least for me personally, comes from doing well in school. So all of a sudden you're in the real world and you don't get, like you don't get that external validation as quickly or as easily or as in a predictable manner as you used to. It's like, okay, if I do XYZ, I'm going to get an A, and I will have that like internal confidence that I'm on the right track and I'm headed in the right direction. And then all of a sudden you're in the real world and it's not like that at all. And so I feel like for me that was really difficult and why like I miss school so much and I can't wait to go back. And like 2 years ago I was like thinking about going to grad school pretty much just for that reason. Like I mean I was interested in the subject as well and I would have probably enjoyed being in grad school and learning and all of that. But it was just like I really enjoy being in school that and primarily for that reason. It's like my whole life, like, everyone was like, okay, like you're good at this, like, like you get easy affirmation and that was like my entire self-worth. And then all of a sudden it was like, okay, like what is the meaning of my life when I don't have that anymore? So, you know, I think that probably is related to what we wanted to talk about like the quest for meaning after, graduating from college because it's like, okay, like what is my life gonna revolve around now? Is it just work or is it other things, my relationships or whatever? So that transition was definitely very difficult for me. And I had a similar experience because, like I don't really even know how to describe myself completely, to be honest, but like I will have very introverted phases of my life and very extroverted phases of my life. And I also kind of just jump between both of them kind of easily. And, even in like one phase of my life, like, I will be like antisocial, but I'll still be going out and stuff like that. So it's like I was kind of in the same boat. Like me and Micah would talk about this all the time, even in college. Like when we were in college about like, how annoyed we were by XYZ or whoever, and we were just like, I don't know, we both I think enjoy our alone time for sure. I mean, not to sound like, bratty or anything, but yeah, I think Micah and I are both very similar in that way. Or at least we definitely were very similar when I was in college, my senior year, where, like I didn't mind the fact that I had to suddenly just spend a bunch of time alone. In fact, I think it was good for me for a short amount of time. And yeah, like when COVID first hit, like I was enjoying that aspect of it where all of a sudden, your social obligations kind of just come down to zero. And I enjoyed that. But, obviously I think a lot of people have experienced this since COVID. I mean, at least I did. And that's just been, what relationships have been like after all of that. Because normally I feel like, and also just once you graduate college, it's not just COVID. I think in general, adults definitely struggle with making new friends and, just having like opportunities for that and really having it stick. But I think COVID definitely made that a lot worse. I don't know, what has your experience been like with that, Micah?
Yeah, I would say for me, I think it's interesting in terms of friendship because even in college, there were a lot of, people I hang out with quite often. And I was at a time where I was not personally confident. I was very confident with the work I could produce and achieve through school, but on a personal and I guess relational level, my interactions with a lot of my friends, I would often feel as if I couldn't express myself the way I wanted to, or I was a bit of a people pleaser, and people wouldn't care to hurt my feelings. And I think that's in part why I quickly became friends with you because I think that we're both, rational and caring people. So we think a lot before we speak. But I realized even, after college, I had this crisis and I thought, how might I find meaning? I tried painting, learning the guitar, got a dog, got a cat, and I connected with some of my old friends from college. And it was interesting because, some people who I truly really disliked back in college, but they were my friends. We've become friends, and I talk to them sometimes on a weekly, on a monthly basis. Some of them I tried reconnecting with. We talked for a little bit, and now I've realized there's really no point in being friends with you for various reasons. And not even to say that they might be a bad person, but you get to pick your friends. You might as well pick someone that's truly beneficial to your life. And then I've also had these other friends who I would say don't respect my boundaries. And so those are friendships I've kind of discarded. And um, yeah, so in terms of making new friends, I tried to make, I guess, new friends with my old friends. Some of those were successful. And in general, I have some coworkers who, at work, we're very friendly, but those are coworker friend relationships. So you probably don't call them real friends. And outside of work, there are some people I'm friendly with, but I wouldn't say we're friends. And so yeah, I wouldn't say I have really any friends in Los Angeles, but I don't really mind that because I like to spend a lot of my time producing stuff, working on stuff, so it doesn't bother me too much. But I do miss friendship. I do reflect back on sometimes. Even sometimes I reflect back on times with friends I didn't like. And I remember still those good moments we'd have, and I miss those moments. And I wonder if I will ever have that, that companionship again. Not even friendship, but will I have that forced companionship of we kind of hate each other, we kind of like each other, but we're gonna go to the mall and we're gonna go shopping and we're
Hmm.
gonna tolerate each other
Hmm.
because it's so easy now
Hmm.
to
Yeah.
simply not tolerate someone. If I don't like you, I literally never have to see you again. And I mean, work is one place, but everyone's professional in work for the most part. I'm never like, I don't want to see this person ever again at work. But outside of work,
Hmm.
if I don't want to see you, I never have to force myself to see you again. And so that is what
Hmm.
I miss. I miss being forced to be with people I dislike, honestly.
Hmm.
So, how about you?
Yeah.
How has friendship been
Hmm.
for you during
Hmm.
college, post college, and making new friends?
Hmm. Honestly, yeah, I would say like I would relate a lot to a lot of the things that you just said. Like, I don't think I would have expected to look back and be like, I missed that because I think while I was in like the middle of it, it was a lot of like, okay, like I really don't feel like I have that many like real friendships that I'm gonna keep for like a long, long time, you know? Like I would have some people that I thought I would still be talking to, but for the most part, like I was like, okay, I don't know. Like I feel like it's a lot of relationships in college, I think like maybe I wouldn't even have like entertained normally, but it was like, okay, it's like you are stuck in the same, kind of institution together. And it's like you're gonna have classes with these people, you're gonna see them all the time. Like I feel like our university was big, but at least I don't know, for me it wasn't like huge, Like it wasn't the kind of university where you would just like always see people and like not see people that you like didn't know. So like I would constantly be running into like everyone that I knew basically. And also it's like the program that you're in, like it's so like you see the same people over and over and over again, And I think it's interesting the way that you put it. Like you didn't think that you would miss being like forced to interact with like a certain group of people. And I completely agree. Like in the when I was in the middle of it, I was like, oh, I can't wait to get out of here. And like I can't wait to just like, have complete freedom over who's in my life and who isn't in my life. But now looking back, it was like, I don't know, like I do miss it too. And not just that, like, like you said, you reconnected with some people that you didn't used to necessarily like very much, and now you're pretty much friends. And like I feel like I've seen a lot of that too, where it's like, when I first meet someone, I might like just from like, the way they act or certain things that they do, you might think like, oh, they're not like the greatest person, or they probably wouldn't be like the best friend to me or whatever. But like as time has gone on, um, and this happens even with like some of my childhood friends, like from high school or even before that, like middle school and stuff, where they were like terrible people. Like in middle school, and I just remember them being like bullies. Like they were
Mm.
really mean. Not to me, thankfully, but like they would tell me horrible things about like other people. I'd be like, that's really mean. Like you shouldn't say stuff like that. And but now it's like, they've grown up and they've matured a lot. And so I think allowing people to come back as like a more mature version of themselves is something that I was a little more resistant to it in college, I think. And I think as I've gotten older, I've realized like people can learn and people can change. And I didn't used to think that was possible. I was like, nope, like that's like the devil incarnate. Like I should just stay away from them forever. Like stuff like that. And I
Mhm.
genuinely thought they would be like bullies forever, but they weren't. Like, they grew up and they realized, and now they're like nice to
Mm.
people and stuff. So it's like, I think it's important to, I think, open your mind to that, because I don't think I would have seen it if I wasn't open to it. So I think that's a huge thing for sure. And yeah, I do miss it so much. Like I also have that same like kind of like wistful, like longing type, like am I ever gonna have that again, type thing. Like I miss college so much and I talk about that all the time. Like I really just enjoy like the environment and just, it's just like the perfect like place to socialize in that way. And yeah, like I don't know, like once you graduate, I think the closest thing is probably like work, but it's so different. And yeah, I'm like I would literally be in school forever if I could, but I know that's not reasonable. So it's like, okay, it's time for me to like, adjust to the real world and stuff like that. But I feel like I've been talking for a while, so I will let you jump in here.
Well, I know you mentioned that you had friends previously. You thought they were awful people, but you've become friends with them now. So I'm wondering if you've experienced the opposite, where someone you once really valued, maybe just on a friendship level,
Hmm.
you
Hmm.
best friends, but you've
Hmm.
come to realize maybe you've just got nothing in common, or you truly no longer like this person.
Hmm. Yeah, I've definitely had like friendships where I think we just naturally drift apart and we just don't like the relationship just isn't as strong as it used to be. But it's not necessarily because either of us are like bad people, or I just like found something out about them or whatever that I was like, oh, like I changed the way I see this person. Um, I think in general, um, it's always been like my view will have of them will kind of remain pretty, steady. Like it probably won't change too much based on what they do because I think it's like kind of predictable. It's kind of like expected. Like okay, like certain people like they'll behave in certain ways, and I expect that of them. So I don't think I've really had any huge like surprises or anything like that. But I would say like I think a lot of friendships in college were out of convenience and, kind of like proximity and stuff like that. And you don't really realize until there's that distance between all of you that, that was essentially what the friendship was based on almost completely, you know? Because once you have distance, I think a lot of those relationships kind of fade away and you're kind of left with the two or three that are like you're genuinely like friends just because you enjoy each other's company or you like talking to them or whatever. It's not just like, oh, like you're close to me and we kind of had a few good interactions and all of that. So there's been a lot, I think, of those friendships that have kind of fallen away just naturally because of distance. But I can't say like I was necessarily like, you know, changing my mind about the person's character or anything like that. Thankfully. What about you? Have you experienced anything like that?
So I would say, not in terms of having some disdain for their character. I do think I have few friendships that are based kind of on time. It's like if you've been friends with someone, say, for a decade, even if you've grown so
Mm-hmm.
far apart, to
Mm-hmm.
end that friendship would kind of be like ending, not really, yourself from a
Mm-hmm.
decade ago, but there's just so much
Mm-hmm.
history there. And so I would
Yeah.
say I do have some friendships based on time alone. Not time alone, but if
Mm-hmm.
maybe we were to meet today, would we be friends? I don't know because we're so different as people. I'd meet you and
Mm-hmm.
I admire you as a person for
Mm-hmm.
sure, but I don't know if
Mm-hmm.
we would develop a friendship. Not you,
Mm-hmm.
but some friends.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've definitely experienced that too, where it's like when it's based on just time and history, I feel like there's a part of me that just feels like obligated to continue the friendship, but it's not because I genuinely am like, I don't know, it's not the same feeling that I get with like a friend that I'm like really excited to like talk to and like spend time with and stuff, you know? Like a part of it is kind of like, oh, like I feel like it would just be like shitty of me to
Mm,
not like continue this friendship and all of that. So, because we are just like I feel like when you are childhood friends or whatever and like you grow up together, there is a chance that you just change so much as people, especially after you go to
mm,
college and stuff like that. So it's like, it does feel like we're just so different in terms of like our values and beliefs and stuff like that. And I think that's like somewhat important, you know, to
mm-hmm.
to kind of be compatible with. Sorry, that didn't come out
No, that
correctly,
makes
but
sense.
yeah, okay. So yeah, I feel like it's really important to be compatible in that respect, and I think there are some people in my life where I don't feel that sense of compatibility on that level. But it's like I've been friends with them forever, and it's like I
Mm-hmm.
feel like it would be like it would feel bad for me to not continue those relationships. So, but I still love them and stuff. It's not like that's not the reason ever that I wouldn't talk to them or anything like that. And I think I do want to talk about something else you mentioned earlier. Yeah, like you were just saying, like you would have friends that don't know how to respect your boundaries or um, stuff like that, or just, weren't necessarily like great friends and stuff like that in general. And I've definitely had my share of those experiences as well. And I would say, like, as I've gotten older, I'm definitely a lot more selective now, which I think is probably another thing that kind of makes this whole process a little more difficult because I think in college, like you're just like looking like to have people to like do stuff with, because there's always something to do. So it's like, oh, like study together, go out together, eat together, like all of that. And like I wouldn't say I was necessarily very selective in my like
Mm.
choosing of people. Like it was kind of like, okay, like people like if they're nice to me and I'm nice to them and it's like, okay, we're kind of like similar in whatever way, like I would just be friends with them. It wasn't really like, okay, like are they honest? Are they good? Like is their character, like what is their character or whatever. Like I really wouldn't think about any of those things before I befriended them. And now I feel like I don't know, I'm a lot more selective and it's kind of a turn off for me. Like if you're, if you say something or whatever and it doesn't really I'm not like closed-minded, I would say, but I would say like I'm very selective. So it's like yes, I've encountered like hundreds of people since I've graduated college, but it's like I just I'm so selective that it's like very few of them are people that I would even want to be friends with. So I think that definitely makes it a lot more difficult, for sure.
Okay, so that's an interesting point you made, but it's really relatable. I feel like in high school and in college, you're surrounded by so many people. There's so much stuff to do. So, of course, you want to do that stuff and you need people. And so now that you're more selective, I guess I want to ask you, are you lonely? And do you think your selectivity increases your loneliness? Or maybe did you feel lonely despite having all of those people around you back in college? I'm curious about your experiences.
Hmm. Yeah, I'd say I have a very interesting relationship with the feeling of loneliness. Um, like I remember like in high school at least, like up until yeah, like high school, college time, I would have like a feeling of like disconnectedness from other people that I think made me feel very, very lonely. For what one reason or another, like even if I had like friends or acquaintances that were in my life, like I would still have that kind of like underlying sense of loneliness, that I kind of just grew up with, and I just remember having it for like the longest time. And I would say in my later young adult life and more recently, I honestly haven't experienced it that much. Even if I do still spend most of my time alone, I would say I don't feel that same sense of loneliness as much as I used to. I'm not sure exactly why. I think in general, I am a more like a well-adjusted person now, and I do think maybe I also just feel like a greater sense of like connectedness to people, and that's probably why I do not feel that way anymore. But I would say, yeah, like with selectivity, there will be times where it's like, oh, like I wish I had more people in my life to like talk to or hang out with or something, right? Or I'll just have that kind of feeling. And it can kind of manifest in a sense of like loneliness, I would say. I do still have moments where I experience that. Um, and I would say, yeah, I would guess being selective does make it harder for sure. But I also know, like, you know, lowering my standards isn't necessarily going to solve the problem for me because I wouldn't be happy with spending time with someone who I don't think meets my standards. So, like you said earlier, like it's not necessarily like a waste of time, but I would just kind of feel like I'm wasting time. So, um, I wouldn't enjoy it. It kind of would be like a empty, like meaningless interaction, and I wouldn't really gain anything from it. So it's like, I don't know, I don't feel very motivated to engage in situations like that. So yeah, I would say selectivity definitely makes it harder, but at the same time, it's kind of like, I don't really see a solution to that because I just know that even whether it's with like friendships or dating or whatever, I myself know like I wouldn't be completely happy settling for anything less. So there's just like that's not really an option in my mind. So I feel like I'll just probably just stay selective because I just feel like that's what comes naturally to me. So.
Yeah, I mean, again, I keep saying I completely agree, but I completely agree. I remember even when I was a kid, if I go back there, I always had such a difficult time with social interactions. And I remember
Hmm.
when I was in second grade, probably up until middle school, but specifically, I remember in second grade, we'd go outside for recess. I would just sit and I would just cry and like have a little meltdown because I don't know, just everything was so overwhelming. And I get older, I try to be more adjusted, and I think now I'm a well adjusted individual. Being in large groups doesn't make me cry. But I do have to say, I do have a preference to not be in large
Hmm.
groups. I definitely
Hmm.
prefer being one on one. But
Hmm.
saying that, throughout middle school and high school, most definitely, I felt very, very lonely. And
Hmm.
I wouldn't say I was necessarily, sure, I was a little weird, but like I had
Hmm.
friends.
Hmm.
I was able to fit in relatively okay. Even in college, when I made quite a bit of friends, I think that I just felt very misunderstood, as they say, and I
Hmm.
didn't feel like I had a real connection with really the majority of my friends.
Hmm.
And so I would say now, despite being post college in a different state and a different city, I
Hmm.
have far better coping mechanisms and far better coping skills. And I said that I naturally kind of prefer like solitude. So loneliness doesn't, in itself, I guess I would say solitude. I appreciate solitude, but I definitely do feel isolated. I feel,
Hmm.
I mean, I'm pretty physically isolated from people
Hmm.
considering. Again, I moved to a different city specifically for my job, but again, it's pretty remote. And when I do go into the office, I enjoy being around people. And then I actually like cherish going to Trader Joe's, and I
Hmm.
make an effort to take out my headphones, talk to the cashiers, and
Hmm.
I actually means like a lot to me. But in general,
Hmm.
I would say I don't, like the loneliness doesn't kill me, but the isolation, I feel quite isolated and I don't like feeling isolated. And I
Hmm.
think, I guess with the work from home discussion, I hear a lot of people talking about on Reddit. I don't know how
Hmm.
accurate Reddit is of the entire
Hmm.
population, but if I go on Reddit and I look at work from home topics, everyone is like,
Hmm.
no, you got to stick it to the corporate company. You gotta do you. Don't go back into that office. Don't submit. And I get if you want to work from home, this isn't a job
Hmm.
on anyone, but I think I, you know, on the one hand, the Surgeon General released a report saying I think over 1 in 2 people experience significant loneliness, and this is exacerbated for young adults. And so I
Hmm.
think that I don't know, the way we live, if you aren't particularly close to family or you don't have nearby
Hmm.
friendship, then you want to
Hmm.
find yourself in certain communities. And I think that work, is one place in
Hmm.
one community, not the community
Hmm.
you should find
Hmm.
yourself in, especially
Hmm.
because, well, it's work. You go for money, right? Some
Hmm.
people don't even want to talk to their coworkers. I think that's completely valid. But
Hmm.
well, do whatever you want to do. But I think that I like to feel like I'm a part of whatever I do. Like I really like to
Hmm.
kind of devote myself to what I'm a part of, and not that I want to be a slave at all to my job, but I would just like to feel like what I do has meaning. Meaning in the
Hmm.
sense of I'm producing something that's going to be useful.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
have this camaraderie with my
Hmm.
coworkers. And so if we even go back to school, I know we both said that so much of our kind of self worth or maybe even our confidence came from school. And I
Hmm.
think although I felt lonely in school, I had these constant, incessant goals, and these goals
Hmm.
made me feel whole, right? They made me feel good.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so I think, I mean, I did school for 22 years of my life, and so school is just some comforting thing and not a safety net. Wouldn't say I'm just going back
Hmm.
to console myself and relieve myself of the
Hmm.
real world, but I do
Hmm.
miss, I think it's a constant. no matter what's going
Hmm.
on in my life, I have school. So,
Yeah, I think what you said about community is very important. Like honestly, I have never been someone who really takes like school spirit very seriously. So I think it was like probably like not expected that I would miss a sense of like community from the college experience because I was never like, oh, I'm a Baylor Bear or whatever. Like, I'm sorry. Like, I love Baylor and like the whole experience and stuff, but I've never been someone who's crazy about stuff like that. So, but I like looking back, I think that's probably another reason, like, the last 2 years or 3 years have been, maybe a little more challenging. But I think in general, in, Western society, and especially like in modern times, I think we do live very like isolated lifestyles. And for a lot of people, I think finding a sense of community can really be a really big struggle. Um, and yeah, I mean, I've like struggled with it myself, certainly over the last few years, especially, but in general too, I think, and like you said, like, I think I've been like searching for a remedy to that. Like, okay, let me just get involved in some kind of project that's like meaningful enough to me. And that will, make me feel like I'm doing something good and meaningful that involves other people in some way. And yeah, I can definitely sense that there's been like a void in my life in that respect. Um, and as a result, just like a lack of meaning, especially because for me, I think I'm like a very like relationship and like people-centered person. So a lot of like the meaning in my life certainly comes from the people in it and like the people either that I'm helping or talking to or whatever in some way. So it's like feeling like I'm not a part of like something bigger that involves other people. I think it definitely like there is like a sense of like a lack of fulfillment completely. And I've been experimenting, like trying different things and seeing like, okay, like maybe in terms of my career or like volunteering or just socially in general, like I can try to fill that void as much as possible. But it certainly is there. And like if you compare like, like life in like an industrialized like Western country to maybe somewhere else in a different culture or something like that, I think you will see like a generally like a greater sense of community in cultures like that. And I think people do feel a little less isolated in cultures and societies like that. And, I think it's linked to like a lot of different things, like including mental health concerns, like, depression, anxiety. I think a lot of it comes from just being like a very isolated, disconnected individual that doesn't feel like they're a part of a community or like something greater in any way. And obviously, you see that manifest in like people joining cults and stuff like that in the past. So, I didn't want to bring up cults right away in the first episode, but I felt like it was, you
uh,
know, kind of relevant. But yeah, I mean, I think there is a lot of that like sentiment, and it's not, um, uncommon for sure.
yeah, no, I was going to say I completely understand why people join cults.
Hmm.
I mean, I think if I didn't have these, I guess, plans to hopefully change how I feel currently, cults would be relatively appealing to me, especially, if they were nice, good people. They're not harming anyone, like a club, but it's a cult. I could join one of those. I'm not going to, but
Hmm.
I consider joining church, every Sunday, although
Hmm.
I'm not particularly religious, but really just to find some sort of community. And I love to sing. And I kind of want to make a note. I think that I don't really know how I want to say this, but things
Hmm.
like singing, they're just so good for the soul. I
Hmm.
would like to have, some community where we don't just go out for coffee. So sometimes I look on Meetup. There's
Hmm.
like Meetup for coffee,
Hmm.
Meetup for hiking, and actually being in nature is good. But
Hmm.
I think something like church, where you get to perform these rituals where you have this belief in something and you can manifest this belief kind of, although I know that's not what church is, but kind of the concept, you believe something, you do these things, and you kind of loosely expect this outcome, and then you sing. And I feel like singing and music are such powerful tools to bring people together. And I mean, of course, music is such a big thing within across all cultures, but sometimes when I think about the modern world and how I think we've forgotten such basic human principles. And I was kind of shocked to find out how much diet, sleep, and exercise fundamentally affect my mental well being and how much my physical health ties into my mental health and vice versa. And so I guess
Hmm.
I'm just trying to say I'm kind of going back. For the longest time, I was trying to learn more about, learn. I'm in tech, and so I'm kind of not focusing on my human aspects so much, but
Hmm.
I guess I've just found value in things like meditation and things like when I work out too, I like to strength train because I like to think about my muscles contracting, that mind body connection. Or when I eat, I like to look up where my source is, to look where my food is sourced from. And I think that is one thing that's really helped me, I guess, kind of find meaning, kind of find what does it mean
Hmm.
to be a human at a basic sense, and even
Hmm.
try to lessen my use of social media. Although I've never been a huge user of social media, but yeah.
Hmm. Yeah. I read this book, like, I think while I was writing my honors thesis, and it was a book on like existential philosophy, basically. And the author of it was like he was very good at putting a lot of it together. And he was kind of talking about like the condition of modern man. And it's like, basically how, like if you're born into this world, like this modern world, and so much of it is just so removed and like detached from, kind of where we've started, kind of as a civilization, I would say, that like so much of it has been abstracted out that like if you're just kind of thrown into it, like you have that like feeling of like being disoriented, like you don't know where any of this came from. Like all of it is so abstract that you can't really grasp onto anything concrete. And so I think for a lot of people, like you see that kind of, you go back to like the basics, like, okay, my body, like how does it feel in my body? Or like meditating, taking care of your physical health, taking care of your mental health. And like that's just a really big way I think people can kind of reconnect to the part of them that feels like very human. Like you said, you were in tech, and I think like we could have probably endless conversations about that because, there's always something new in tech and all of that. And there's that constant kind of issue of, is technology making society different in any way? Like, is it removing us from our humanity in any way? Like, are we moving away from our humanity, and is that detrimental to us as people? Um, because for me personally, like, I think all of my well-being comes from being really, really grounded in my humanity and not, um, kind of allowing these like outside influences to kind of affect that too much. Because just like you, like I don't really use social media too much. We could probably have a whole episode on that. Like I really think, like everything that's out there is affecting us, like our psychology, our behavior. Like who knows how deep or how subconscious it really goes. I think it affects us like at a very deep level, and so I try to like really moderate my use of it, or limit it as much as possible. um so yeah, I would say like that's definitely one of like the most obvious like concerns of this like time that we're living in, for sure. um and I mean, I think we could have like like whole episodes on a lot of the things you brought up, just like how your physical health affects your mental health and meditating even. Like I never took meditating seriously. Um, but I think in the last 2 years, I've been doing it somewhat consistently. And I think that's probably one of the biggest reasons, like, I call myself like a well-adjusted person now. Because I think before I started meditating, I would probably classify myself as like somewhat neurotic. I think women in general tend to be a little higher in neuroticism, but I would always kind of used to classify myself as kind of like higher on that scale, just anxious or worrying or just, a lot of negative emotion. I used to struggle with that a lot. And I think I don't as much anymore. And a big part of that is just meditating and learning how to control my thoughts and emotions and feelings and all of that. So I feel like we could have honestly like whole episodes on all of those things you brought up, and I think they're really great. But I'll let you jump in because I've been talking for a while now.
Yeah, and I kind of want to expand upon the meditation a little bit more because, it's something, of course, that really grounds you and that makes you focused on the present. And kind of the opposite of that is social media because there's so much information. And especially with the reels now, some of them are like 10 seconds long. It's just this constant input and influx of information. And I find it overwhelming. And sometimes I'll go on my phone and I will just scroll. So I've deleted most of the apps from my phone so I don't get too
Hmm.
distracted. So I might just go
Hmm.
to my music app and I'll stroll and
Hmm.
I'll look for music
Hmm.
and I might stroll for a
Hmm.
few minutes. And the
Hmm.
strolling is pretty much aimless. It's like, why am I strolling? But I think it's because
Hmm.
I've used Instagram for a decade. It's like, okay, I'm just scrolling because it's like second nature to me.
Mhm. Yeah, no, I think I can definitely jump off of that. Like, that's one of the most worrisome things to me, and I've noticed the same thing, which is why I really just tried to kind of get that under control over the last few years. Is like you're scrolling because it's like a habit, like it's all habitual, and you're like you've kind of unknowingly programmed yourself to kind of start doing that just as kind of like a thing that you do when you don't know what to do with yourself. So like you don't know what to do yourself, you pick up your phone and we just mindlessly just like click on different apps and like scroll through it and whatever. And I think all of us have that experience. And like to me, like it was, yeah, as I started becoming more aware of it, I was like, okay, like this is a little concerning to me, especially because of how addictive it is and how addictive it was and how addicted I was to it. Sorry, I don't know if that came out correctly, but I was very addicted to my phone at one point, and I'd say I've improved a lot over the last 2, 3 years because I've tried to be really conscious about it. And so now I'll really only have like maybe a part of the day where I let myself use my phone. And then for the rest of the day, I try to put it away somewhere else and I try to not to go on it because I was like, it kind of scared me, the feeling of like not being in control of something. And it was like, you look at your screen time and it's like 4 hours a day or something, and then you see some other people, it's like 14 hours a day or something. I was like, that's crazy. Like you're spending 14 hours a day on your phone. Like, and it's like I'm young and I'm supposed to be doing things with my life and supposed to be like working towards things. And so I was like, this is not gonna work out for me at all, so it was like social media was addicting, like the phone itself was addicting, and all of these things are designed to be addicting, obviously, because all of these companies, like their entire profit is kind of based on like user engagement. So it's like the more people that they can get to kind of get on the phone and stay on the phone, it's like the more money they're going to make. So everything is designed to kind of pull you in, and you're kind of just left as a consumer to kind of moderate that yourself. And it's very challenging for sure. And I think I struggled with it a lot. And there was like times during that where I was like, can I even get off of my phone if I wanted to, And I really questioned that. And I think now it's like, okay, I've gotten to a point where it's like I have enough control over it again because I've really tried to made it a point to kind of practice that. But before this, I was very like, I probably was like, I don't even know if that's possible. Like, I might
Mhm.
just be too addicted and I might just not have control over this area of my life. And I think that's very concerning. And I think a lot of people aren't even really conscious about that, you know? Like, and they'll go back and like see like, oh, they're spending hours and hours and hours on their phone every day, consuming all kinds of content, usually which is being marketed to them. And I don't think they realize like how that might be changing them, psychologically and behaviorally even. So,
Mm-hmm. No, yeah. So like I said, I've deleted a lot of my apps and I try to limit the amount of time I spend on social media. The main one I use is YouTube. And so, of course, I'm getting influenced by the videos I click on, although for the most part, they're tailored to my interest. However, the ads, I realize if I search for something, say about potentially becoming a farmer, okay, then I'll get ads about becoming a farmer. And maybe that was just a thought I had, but then I'm getting these ads, and then, part of me is like, okay, I truly do want to change this life I am living and pursue something completely different. But it's kind of crazy how this one little thing that I might have looked up is appearing in as an ad to me several times in a given day, and it truly influences the outcomes I want from my life. But I guess I have a question, and it's that a little while ago you mentioned you're trying to get back into your humanity by doing things like meditation, caring about your friendships, just really getting back to the core of what it means to be a human. And so, with social media, do you think that, or at least from my perspective, it is kind of the opposite of humanity, which isn't some kind of radical belief, but at least I guess from my upbringing, I didn't really develop this sort of individualistic view. Of course, I do see myself as a self separate from other people, but I didn't have this large importance placed on myself. And so when I think of humanity, I guess I kind of associate it with these moral attributes of humanity is kind of equivalent to community, although, of
hmm
course, I think that's more of a personal value. But even
hmm
when I think back how our ancestors used to live in communities. Now, they did war with other communities, so it's not to say that humanity is this pure thing. But anyway, I just say that because with social media, I feel like it's this emphasis placed on the self. Your value kind of comes from clout or followers or how visually appealing you are, or maybe whatever you have to offer is. And
hmm
so when I use social media or when I observe it, I just think that it's kind of this disconnect between what actual humanity is versus, or when I use social media, I think it's a disconnect between real and what is genuine, or AKA humanity, in my opinion, and what is absolutely fake. Although I know there are some genuine people that use social media and good can come out of it. But I'm curious as to what you think.
No, certainly. I'd say like my perspective is very similar and probably like, towards the end you made that like nuance and stuff. I think I do have the same concern. I think social media kind of intrinsically, at least in the way it kind of is generally used, in the way that I see it being used, I think kind of does promote you know, kind of a narcissistic type of behavior. And it's kind of all focused on, glorifying and displaying the self. And in that manner, I think, or in that respect, I think I do have concern, especially for people that are growing up in this culture. I think people our age, we kind of remember a time when there wasn't such a thing as social media and we were kind of just living in the real world, and then it kind of came up as this thing that you could kind of voluntarily choose to have or not have. But I think people in the younger generation, I think I don't know the numbers exactly or anything like that, so I don't, I can't speak to the empirical truth of this, but in general I think because it's such a big part of their culture, I think in general they're probably doing it to a much larger, extent. So I think for them, it's probably a bigger concern growing up with that, like believing that, you know, the ideal life is one that is completely focused on the self and glorifying the self. And I do have concerns about that because I don't necessarily think that's what leads to the most like well-adjusted human being psychologically. I think, everyone, I mean, most people would agree, like humans are very social creatures, and we do need that sense of community, like you were bringing up, to really be healthy, I think, psychologically and socially. So not having that, or kind of having an imbalance in that way, I think could manifest in maybe a society that isn't as well adjusted, because of maybe some misguided values or certain things like that. um, and like you said, like I think there are definitely opportunities for social media to be used in a way that is consistent and aligns with the side of us that is, more human. And you see that all the time. Like, I think a lot of things that become popular on social media are popular for exactly that reason, is because I think people on at least an unconscious level still gravitate towards content like that, that isn't just like completely like spiritually or emotionally or mentally like impoverished. Like, yes, there's the like trashy side of the internet that is just pure trash, but there's, also people will try to find things that and appreciate things that, do relate to the side of us that is human. And I think that's definitely an obvious thing that people you will see if they go on social media. So I think it can be used in a way to express that side of ourselves and all of that. But I also think for the vast majority of people, that people aren't necessarily using it consciously. And that's kind of where the concern lies, I think, because if you had a society of people who were very conscious about all of these things and thought about all of these things and decided, okay, no, I am going to use social media consciously as, an extension of myself, and the self that is there in reality is a completely like well-adjusted whole human being, then there's nothing wrong with that. My only concern is when, things kind of start moving in a direction kind of opposite from that. And you do see some of that happening, I think in my own personal experience, like if I spend more time on social media and stuff like that, I think naturally, you kind of tend towards like more narcissistic type thinking because you're just thinking about yourself all the time. And I just don't think that's necessarily healthy. And obviously, if you're aware of it, you can be like, okay, you know, um, as long as I am aware of these things and still kind of generally feel like a whole person, or I know exactly why I'm doing these things, then I think it's okay. Because I think the why is also important to look at. Like, why are you on social media? Why are you posting? Um, so that's something to think about for sure.
Yeah, and I want to talk about the point you made about your concern specifically for younger people because, I do know when I got an Instagram, probably when I was, say, 14 and in high school, it did cause a bit of, or kind of a lot of, like emotional duress, probably what was typical for other teenage girls. But I remember when I went off to college around 2017 and they released the Explore page, I think, on Instagram around that time. And I
Mm-hmm.
was like, wow, I am happy I did not have this when I was in middle school and in high school because
Mm-hmm.
this itself would have made me feel probably a lot worse because I think that was the era of the Instagram model. And
Mm-hmm.
um, I also remember a time where I was told, don't trust what you see on the internet. What you see on the internet is not real. But I do think there's been a reversal, and that kind of you accept. I mean, the internet now has such a large influence on like my concept of what is going on in the world, especially because I mentioned I'm very physically isolated. I limit the time I spend on social media, but even if I go in the news, kind of that in itself is a social media site. I use Yahoo. I haven't come up with the Times, and so when I
Hmm.
go in these news articles, I see these comments. I now my biggest goal is to just ignore the comments if I go on YouTube or I go on Yahoo, because
Hmm.
little things people say
Hmm.
still influence me. But I say this because there's been this reversal for me where what I see in the internet, it's not true. So now the internet kind of tells you what the world is, what happens in the world, what to believe and what not to believe. But I am happy that
Hmm.
for myself, maybe it's also an age thing. I am not super
Hmm.
impressionable, and so I don't
Hmm.
simply believe what I see. But I think for a young
Hmm.
person that grows up using things like Instagram or TikTok where you just accept what people tell you, then if you kind of
Hmm.
go to other genres, say you're looking at clothing or fashion advice, um, I don't know, you may trust individuals. You may trust their words when they tell you
Hmm.
things that may be out of
Hmm.
their alley in terms of expertise. And so that's kind of what I'm fearful of. I don't know. I think if I were to have a child, a teenage boy or girl, I would be so scared for them to use the internet simply because
Hmm.
there's so much information that I simply think is false that is easily
Hmm.
talked about in a positive way. And that's not even because
Hmm.
I think I am close minded. It's just because I
Hmm.
think, like you said, there are certain values that are important to uphold. And I think some of those values are humility, respect, kindness, and hard work. And if you go on Instagram, say, and you see an Instagram model, and no knock at all to any Instagram model, but
Hmm.
I don't want my daughter or my son to get their value from their physical appearance. I think that it's fine if you do have confidence that stems from your appearance, but I
Hmm.
would hope that you pick up a craft or a skill that that instills some confidence within you and that empowers you. So,
Yeah, I think that's definitely, certainly a part of my concerns too. I think in general, one of the things I've noticed is how much the content that I consume affects me. And I think that's true for most people, whether they're conscious of it or unconscious of it. So I think if you're consuming, a certain type of content from a very young age, especially an age when you are impressionable, and it's not necessarily, the best content, or it's not going to teach you the values that, our generations like tried to pass down to us, I can definitely see some harm in that, for sure. And yeah, I'm not sure, to be honest. Like, if I will, I think I would probably not allow my kids to use that for an extended amount of time, because I think people underestimate like the 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 influence and the effects that it can have. Like, I think for both of us, like, we would assume like, okay, like, we're smart, intelligent people, like, we're past the age of being impressionable, stuff like that. But I wouldn't necessarily, yeah, like, maybe underestimate how damaging it can be, even for adults. And that's something that I've recognized in my own life. Maybe I'm just immature in that regard, and I haven't matured past that. I'm not entirely sure,
no,
but
I mean,
I think,
I
yeah,
agree.
it.
I didn't mean to
Mhm.
say, not that I am not
No, no, no. I know what
impressionable,
you're
but
saying.
I'm
Yeah.
simply not as
Hmm.
impressionable when I was younger. Because I definitely have to
Hmm.
modulate the
Yeah.
activity. I mean, I can't use social media because it
Hmm.
does have an impact. Or I cannot use
Hmm.
Instagram too much because it definitely does have an impact on my
Hmm.
emotional state afterwards. And even
Hmm.
if it's not necessarily, I'm looking at these entrepreneurs that are making millions of dollars. Because if I'm being honest, I'm not
Hmm.
envious of that. I don't, it's not something I
Hmm.
necessarily seek out. But I think
Hmm.
having it, if I see if people I knew from middle school that I didn't particularly like, I get annoyed. I don't care about their posts necessarily. And so I think I kind
Hmm.
of like to say goodbye to certain phases of my life and not have constant
Hmm.
reminders, especially if those phases weren't favorable to me. So,
Hmm.
yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, like I was thinking about this the other day where I was like, it's so weird because I grew up with like Facebook and stuff. Like I've been using Facebook probably since I was like at least 13 is like my earliest memory of it. So I've been using it for a while and I got off for maybe a couple of years when I was like, okay, I'm gonna do like a social media detox or whatever. But it's just so crazy to me because now I'm like used to it. Like I'm used to the algorithms like these companies created like in the beginning to kind of be like, okay, this is how like the online space is going to work. And now I'm so used to it, like I really don't question it at all. But like recently I was like, maybe scrolling through social media of some kind and probably seeing different faces from my past. And I was just thinking about the fact like if I didn't have social media and I didn't see these people as regularly as I do, like I would have forgotten completely about them. Like I wouldn't have remembered like they exist because there's a lot of people from high school that I don't remember at all. Because I wasn't really on social media too much in high school. And so a lot of people's names and faces, like, I really don't remember at all. But for college, I think because there are certain people in college, like, I will have followed, it's like they stay in my mind longer just because of the fact that I have social media. And that's not something that I necessarily like, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think there are some people where it's like, I really wouldn't mind just forgetting about them completely. And it's like social media is something that kind of continues to like remind me of their existence. Whereas like if I was living in a world without social media, and this is how I was before I kind of started using it, was like I just I wouldn't ever think about them again. That's just the way that I would be. And it's like I would much rather I think live that way than the way that I am living right now. It's like why? Like I don't care about these people. Like they have no relevance to my life and it's not even like I interact with them on social media. It's like I'm just too much of a I don't know, like I don't have the yeah, courage to just like unfollow them because I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings. But yeah, that's like essentially it.
What you have to do is you unfollow and then you force them to unfollow you too. That's what I do, and I don't feel bad because if I unfollow, I feel bad because I
Hmm.
remember
Hmm.
back in middle school. I don't know when I got an Instagram, but if I would follow someone back and they did not follow me,
Hmm.
it hurt me so much. My like 12-year-old
Yeah.
self was distraught. But
Hmm.
I do think that having all of these connections that are, genuinely futile just kind of
Hmm.
increase my feelings of a lack of purpose throughout life. I don't even know. I guess it's really not that big of a deal, but I just
Hmm.
if I see so this is before because I deleted my Instagram and now I follow a few people. But before I would
Hmm.
see people and I would see their lives and again sometimes no emotion of envy would be emitted from me sometimes, but I would just have this uneasy feeling of why are you still a part of me? It's like is
Hmm.
everyone I meet in my life in the future. Now I'm going to remember them until I die. I just it makes me feel weird. I don't really know how to describe it
Yeah.
besides it's just a little
Hmm.
weird, but yeah.
Hmm. I know, and it's like accepted as like normal now. Like that's just like the normal like your daily scroll through Facebook or like Instagram is like someone you talked to once 7 years ago who you're going to follow now for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
And no, I mean it is pretty brutal if you follow someone and they don't follow you back. I totally relate to that. And so do you tell them to unfollow you or do you just
Mm,
block them?
no, there's a button where you can say, I don't know the language, but it's basically a force unfollow or force them to unfollow you. I do that first
Okay.
and then I unfollow. And that doesn't make me feel bad if I'm
Okay.
being honest because I don't want to see their life anymore. We've
Hmm.
met maybe two
Yeah.
times or we've met 10 times,
Hmm.
but I secretly
Yeah.
wish we didn't meet, you know? And people definitely think the same thing about me. I am sure. So it's a circle of life.
Okay, and I think there's also like a mute button where you can just like mute
I have
them so
some
they don't
people
show up
muted
on your
too.
timeline.
Yeah, I have a few friends muted that I would actually feel bad if I were to do that. So I just mute them. But yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I think I am so curious how, what it was like, I guess, to be born in the 80s and to kind of have your adolescence develop without the use of social media at all. How you get from school to your friend's house without Google Maps. How you navigate around your city. Or even maybe, I don't know when the phone came out, I'm not trying to offend, but we'll just say it came out in the 80s. When I grew up, it wasn't a crazy phenomenon to have a mobile phone. When I got my first phone, now it was. I did get a slide phone. I had one of those for my first phones, but I still. One thing I wonder is now. I mentioned earlier when I dislike someone. Now I never have to see them again unless it's at work. I'm fine with everyone at work. But back in the day, we'll just say in the 80s, you didn't have social media. I'm pretty sure people definitely interacted more. So I am curious, did people just like each other, or were they just forced to be around each other? Were people more hospitable and willing to appease each other and their differences for the sake of some peace? Or I don't know, what do you think? Or maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm an intolerable person.
I feel like they probably were. They probably were. And I've noticed that like quality in myself, and it's not one that I necessarily like very much. And I think it's a consequence of growing up with a lot of choices and a lot of options where it's like, okay, like I have the means and the freedom to live my life the way that I want to live it, and I will never have to adjust to another person for any reason whatsoever. So it's like I don't have that ability necessarily. It's much easier for me to just cut someone off than to be like, oh, I'm going to adjust and I'm going to compromise. Like that really is a skill that I'm lacking completely almost. And it shows like and recently I've been like wanting to live alone because living with other people is difficult for me. Like I can't, I don't know, work my routine or schedule around other people's, or like I don't like having to do that. So it's like I feel like because we have all of these options, because we have the freedom and the means to kind of live a completely self-sufficient life, we can, maybe some of us have kind of lost the ability to kind of like adjust and adapt to the existence of other people. It's like I could literally just ignore the existence of humanity for days and weeks, and I've done that before. And it's nice in a way having the ability to do that, especially if you are someone who's like introverted or has antisocial tendencies or whatever. But at the same time, it's like I've noticed like I really am lacking in that skill. But yeah, I mean, if I think of like, I don't know how, I can't really speak to this. Like, we'll have to probably have someone on the podcast, like, who's a little bit older who can actually speak to the truth of it. But it's like, people probably were a little bit nicer, or like more hospitable, or like more, tolerant of people that are different from them. Um, yeah, I'm sure it was probably different in that way, and it wasn't as isolating or anything like that. So, even in terms of like living situation and circumstances and stuff, I think, I think we're more prosperous now and people have more options, but I think when you don't have as many options, you kind of have to build that like ability to adjust and to adapt and to kind of make do with what you have. And if you're, well off and your prosperity is increasing as a country, maybe that's not something you necessarily have to do as much of anymore. And so maybe, maybe we're all kind of lacking in that a little bit. I certainly am, at least. Yeah.
So
Okay.
I saw this video of this guy that witnessed a stabbing at Starbucks, and um, this man was with his daughter, and Another man was smoking a cigarette, and so the man asked him to stop smoking the cigarette. Something ensues, and the man ends up stabbing him and killing him in front of his little daughter. And then I think his fiance comes in and she sees. Now, the
Hmm.
man that was recording, he sensationalized it. He was like, "Oh my goodness,
Hmm.
I just witnessed a stabbing," and he posted a video on TikTok, and he kept posting several videos on TikTok, and so it was
Hmm.
a very disgusting behavior. He just was
Yeah.
attempting to get clout from it, but
Hmm.
I think I don't know how. Maybe there obviously were these crazy individuals that existed in the past. It's not like this is some new phenomenon. But I see cases like this, and then I see cases where. Anyway, I guess I don't think this is some new phenomenon of crazy people. Crazy has always existed. And I just wonder, though, if the average person that would not have partaken in such behavior where they completely disregard the life and tragic death of an individual for the sake of their own potential clout. I wonder if we're going to see more of that in the future. And yeah.
Hmm. Probably. Like, I have very low expectations of humanity, to be honest. Um, yeah, I think, the internet has been around for a long time, and we've probably all seen people do pretty terrible things as a result of it. So I think it'll continue. I think we've seen that in the past.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting you said that you have very low expectations of humanity because I was talking to someone a few days ago and I essentially said the same thing and he said, "Oh wow, no,
Hmm.
I think the world is going to get better." And
Hmm.
I thought, "Wow, that is crazy." And I think that's just because of all of the topics we've touched on within the past
Hmm.
hour or so. I mean, I
Hmm.
don't see a society in which we as a whole, start valuing people and community more than money, career progression, which aren't bad things, of course, but I think that
Hmm.
valuing above, I guess, the essence of humanity, and I think one topic we do eventually need to discuss is AI, but
Hmm.
it's crazy how there's some things I used to do, for instance, art, and I no longer have to rely on a digital artist. I can simply use a tool. And there are other fields that have been impacted. I read something about copywriting. Anyway, but
Hmm.
again, moving far away from and I'm kind of surprised that I view, say, the field
Hmm.
of software engineering. I don't think that I'm not personally concerned, but hey, maybe in
Hmm.
30 years, maybe
Hmm.
in 10 years, maybe I'm being far too conservative in my estimation. Maybe in 5 years, I don't know, but let's say
Hmm.
eventually the field gets disrupted to the point where I'm without a job. And before, I wouldn't have thought the act of typing code to be relatively a human thing, like I am partaking in humanity by sitting at a computer and designing some software. But I mean, it is because although that software isn't physical, it's a real human product. And so the thought that AI maybe someday will even further take us away from humanity is, I don't know, kind of
Hmm.
just interesting.
Yeah, I think that's very like, yeah, it's crazy. I was watching some videos about that too, how it's kind of changed the game for a lot of artists, and I don't know, it's kind of like hitting them the hardest right now because of the fact that AI can just produce like these patterns or whatever that people were trying to make for money, and it could make it instantly and take a lot less time, take a lot less money, all of that, and I mean, it's going to be pretty uncomfortable for them specifically, I think, for a while. And yeah, I mean, I think it could replace a lot of things probably in the future too, depending on how advanced it gets. But like my view of it is like, yes, it's going to affect people, but I think it's also going to like free people up to do more than we have in the past, you know? I think with any general kind of revolution in like in terms of like technology or whatever, it's like it puts people out of work for a short amount of time, but I think as a whole, like that society can now do more because it's not using all of these resources to produce the same exact output where it can, you know, like now it can you can just use the machine, right? So all of those people are now free to do something else. So I think, you know, if an AI can produce like general code, for example, like for a website, for example, you know, maybe really basic web developers are out of work, but now they can, you know, they'll just have to increase their skills to do something else or do something more, right? Like it's like you don't need the same resources to produce the same output. So as a society, you're kind of getting better and there is more free labor to kind of progress past that. But it's like, okay, maybe there's a point where, you know, it's like it does hurt some people. I think it will hurt people, but you know, that's kind of my view of it. Obviously, we can't really predict the future, but I think in general, it's kind of like a good thing, but it's like always uncomfortable in the short term because people do get angry, you know, like if they've worked their entire life towards some kind of career and now they're out of a job and have to like, you know, reevaluate and retrain themselves for something else. Like that's really annoying, and a lot of people probably don't want to do that.
So then I'm guessing that you think overall this new shift will require different skills and not necessarily more difficult skills. You think that,
Hmm.
say, a digital artist that is affected is going to be able to find
Hmm.
something or is going to be able to relatively easily transfer to something else.
I can't really guarantee that, you know. Maybe like the art space will really be so inundated by stuff that's produced by AI that there really is no room for real artists anymore. Although I feel like that's, you know, we can have a whole separate episode just about that, the value of like real art compared to like art that's produced by a machine, you know? Because some of it is very good and it's like, okay, you know, that kind of makes people reevaluate a lot of things. But yeah, I can't say like for any specific profession in general, but yeah, like for example, if you're a programmer and you know, you have these tools now, whereas before you would take weeks to create something that, you know, can now be generated automatically with the click of a button. It's like you can do more now because you have more time, you know. You click the button, you generate the initial kind of framework or whatever you need, and then you build on that, you know. So it's like I think it kind of also has to do with like the individual and their individual motivation, because some people will adapt to changes and some people won't. So the people that aren't able to adapt to things, I think they'll struggle a lot because they're kind of like, okay, I studied for this for 10 years, I'm not going to, you know, kind of work on improving my outdated skills, because sometimes, you know, skills do go out of date. So it's like, okay, now your whole entire resume is outdated, so how are you going to, you know, kind of build that to be like something that's relevant to the current society, like whatever is in demand, you know? And so some people I think will kind of be better at that than others. So I think a lot of it has to do with the individual too. So it's like, okay, like none of these skills are marketable anymore. I need to go back and figure out what's going to work, because I feel like there's always opportunities if you're willing to look for them. So but I can't like, yeah, I can't say like, you know, that specific skill itself is you're going to be able to directly transfer it to something else. I feel like it really depends on the situation and, you know, what's happening. But I mean, things that like it is difficult, you know, things move so quickly now. That's kind of like it's kind of inevitable sometimes for some in some areas, and sometimes it's completely unexpected, you know. Like I think sometimes you're like you think like, oh, you're on a secure path and nothing's going to change. Like society isn't going to change, like the economy isn't going to change, and you're always going to just have like job security. And it might be difficult to kind of face that situation where suddenly things have changed and it was something you couldn't have predicted, and now none of your skills are useful or something, and it's a tough situation to find yourself in. Certainly, I think, and maybe some people are in that place now.
Yeah, there's a few points I want to touch in your response. And I guess the first one will be simply about those that are able to adapt will, those that are not as able simply won't, or won't to a high degree of success. And I guess, if I think of myself on an individual level, there's a few reasons why I'm not concerned about the AI advancement. One is because, I mean, I've used these tools and I am pretty disappointed on their ability to give me what I need, although I think they're kind of amazing. But I would genuinely be shocked if these tools were able to take in business logic, work within multiple repositories, and build a feature anytime soon. Maybe one day, but even um, on a slight side note, these companies would have to allow these tools access to their code base, and I think there's this whole thing in trust. Are they going to steal my business rules? Are they going to release some confidential information? So um, just to say that. But I think that that's one small reason. I think, though, that we are both individuals that constantly plan for the future and enjoy a challenge. And so I mean, I've not been affected yet. If I were a digital artist, of course, I would feel that hurt. Or if I were in a profession that was directly impacted at the moment. But that was one thing I wanted to touch on. The other thing is, I guess, the fact that art is being impacted so heavily is disappointing. I feel like I don't know, when I used to think of AI's ability to take on jobs back when it was some kind of theory, some kind of futuristic like trope that would exist within a movie, I always thought it would be I never thought it would be the creative fields. I would think, okay, why do we have writers? Because humans like to be creative. We like to see and read things that humans create. Same thing with movies and the arts. And so it kind of seems weird that technology would hijack a creative field and produce creative things, of course, based off the creative inputs of others.
Yeah, like I actually had something to say about that, because I think your observation is like a very good one and an interesting one, because I think like when I was talking to a friend about AI a couple of years ago, he was like, "Oh, like what do you think about this? Like, do you really think like AI could take over and it could start producing like, useful software or whatever? Like, it could replace software engineers basically." And my answer at the time was like, I mean, my coding experience is limited. I have very basic coding experience, but I do have a little bit. And it's like from everything that I've learned, I was like, I'm not exactly entirely sure how it would work, like how they would program creativity into code, basically. And I was like, I don't know how creative like that could be. I feel like there would be a limit to that creativity, whereas human creativity I see as something like more organic, more infinite, like less limited. So I was like, I feel like they could only program so much creativity into a machine. So that was like the main limitation that I had at the time, and why I didn't necessarily believe like people were like saying like, oh, AI is going to be like conscious, or reach some level of consciousness or some kind of actual intelligence. And that was like, I just don't know how you could replicate creativity, human creativity, in the form of a machine. Obviously, I don't know how AI works at all. That's something that I'm really curious about and want to learn more about in the future. So if anyone out there knows how AI works and wants to explain it to me, like I'm definitely willing to listen. But like I don't know how it works at the time. Like I don't know how creativity is currently being programmed into something. And I thought like I wasn't sure if it was possible at the time. So I think it is kind of interesting that that is like the field that has been affected the most recently, because I would say like that's where most people's skepticism with AI lies. It's kind of interesting that like AI is making the biggest advancements in fields that most people were like skeptical of its ability to make advancements in, if that makes sense. Like I think most people, if they hear about AI and it's like, oh, like a machine could never do that, like a machine could never replicate human creativity. So I don't know if it was purposeful or intentional, like, oh, like let's do the thing like people are saying like we can't do. Like maybe there was an element of that, I'm not sure. But it is interesting to see. Like, I think that's what most people would say about like a machine. Like, oh, it certainly can't do something like that. So maybe they're like, oh, like, challenge accepted or something. I really don't know. I have no, like, I haven't been following this that closely, but it is like that would sit, like, that's kind of what was holding me back from like believing in AI when it was like 2 years ago, people were talking about it. And now it's like, okay, maybe there's some actual potential there. But I don't know. I still have some doubts, especially like you said, like when it comes to the field of like software engineering specifically, there's so much that goes into that. Like, and I just don't know if a machine would be able to do everything that you guys do. I feel like there would be some room for the human for sure. At least like that's my opinion. But also I'm not necessarily completely in the tech space anymore. So I'm not really, I feel like you would probably know more about that than I would.
Yeah, I think that, I guess going back to the creativity aspect real quick, despite AI being magnificently creative, it is so magnificently uncreative and completely. What do you call something that is the essence of plagiarism? Like, what do you. I guess AI is the essence of plagiarism. So, and a lot of artists feel as if, not only, of course, their industry is being disrupted, but I think most importantly, that their artwork has been stolen without any credit. And these tools can, you can type in the name of an artist and then you can say, paint this for me, and then it'll give you a painting in the name of that artist.
Yeah, about the credit, giving people credit, I'd say that's pretty serious. Like because they're using databases of some kind to probably train these models, and if they're not giving artists credit for, or if the artists themselves aren't agreeing for their art to be a part of these databases, there might be some like serious issues there. Because if they're producing all of this art, but they need some kind of data to do that. So, whether or not they're handling that carefully, I think is probably remains to be seen. And like you said, like these tools are amazing, but they're also limited, like in your own experience of them and my own experience with them too. Like, there will be a limit to how much I can ask or how accurate the machine will actually interpret my whatever it is that I'm asking for. So I wouldn't even say like what's released so far is necessarily perfect by any means. So there is that issue as well. And yeah, I know like at least for like cheap things, like for example, like designing patterns or designing things for like phone cases or t-shirts or graphic tees or whatever, like people used to use like graphic designers or digital artists for stuff like that. And now if you can just create like mass produce them of a similar quality with AI, I mean that's you're saving a lot of money in the short term. So I mean, in general. So, it's definitely going to change stuff like that. But maybe like higher end art is still relevant and valid. But I would say, stuff that's just going to go on like a phone case or some kind of like canvas or something, that it might be easier to just rely on a machine to do that than a real person.
Yeah, I think, just 2 points I wanted to make. One about the artists that have their work stolen. I feel like that's fundamentally, like, I mean, I feel like the art is getting stolen, and that's a very big moral question that probably simply won't get resolved because I don't know how you go back on this unless there's some worldwide laws that say, okay, you cannot train X data on X model. And so, um, yeah, I'll just be very curious to see what happens within the next few years. And there was one other example I wanted to give where this individual submitted a AI generated photo to this photography contest, and he won. And I think he even explicitly said it was AI generated. He still won. He was upfront and he stated that the photo was AI generated, but he still received the award. And I think that, I mean, at a very simple level, it's very important to clearly define these rules. If you have new technology, I don't think you just wait for it to keep progressing. Sure, maybe it's going to progress, so it can progress, but to instate some rules because things will get disrupted. I think to just allow something to build aimlessly without having any sort of regulation. Maybe you cannot regulate it, but you can have some rules. You can have some, I don't know. I mean, when things change so quickly, like you said, AI artists are already profoundly affected, or digital artists, I'm sorry, are already profoundly affected. I think that you can just let it happen. You can just force people to adapt. But just maybe if we want to care a little bit more about the humanity, um, do something, have some leeway.
Yeah. I think that's totally fair. That's totally fair, and I think it really depends on like the people involved, the artists themselves, and also like any like regulators and the companies and all of that. I think how they work it out amongst themselves is kind of going to determine what happens. Like it reminds me a lot of like the music industry, for example, where it is property. Like, anything that you create is your property. Like intellectual property, audio that's created, all of that kind of stuff, which can be copyrighted or whatever, like trademarked or however that works. I don't know the details of that. But it's like, okay, it could be the case where you have to ask for an artist's permission before using their art in a database like this. And, maybe if they agree, they'll be given some kind of royalty fee or something based on, what's generated from their images, right? So if somebody uses these images to make money of some kind, maybe some of that money has to go back to the artist because it came from them originally. I think it's probably similar now, like where if you sample a song in your music, you have to pay the original artist a certain amount of money, like for how much ever money you make, like it's a percentage or something like that. So maybe they could move towards a model like that. And if it's working for music, I feel like there's no reason why it couldn't work for, digital art or something like that. As long as you can kind of declare it as some kind of property of some kind, and there's some kind of way to like track it or argue for it or whatever, it might be feasible. But obviously, that would be for like serious players. I don't know if anyone's gonna be willing to like file a lawsuit or go to court over something like this. Maybe they are. I don't know.
Yeah, because I think that if someone were to say, generate this artwork by this artist, then you could clearly tie this AI generated image to that artist's work. But in the event where you simply say generate this without listing an artist, it's kind of like, okay, well, I mean, this model has been trained on millions of images. Is it kind of pointing to this artist and their work? So it would be really interesting to see what kind of, I guess, rules come out of any discussions that might currently be having. And I have seen that there are lawsuits, so I will actually keep looking at those. There's one last point I wanted to make about AI, and that ties back into software development. So, coding is a skill I took a long time to develop, and I know that digital artists have a skill that they took a long time to develop Now a tool can simply do it for them. And even though I guess I'm not worried about my specific job, even the fact that someone can just say, make this website for me using Java and TypeScript, just make a simple outline. It can do that. You can copy and paste it. You just have to figure out how to run it. That makes me mad. I have worked hard on a skill, and this is more so just a selfish thing, like good. There's a different way to view it. It's we're democratizing software development, now, or even with game development, maybe if you, for people that need art, now you can make your own game. Hey, maybe you can make your own game without art skill and without technical skill. All you have to do is have an idea, and now you have this. So,
Yeah, no, like I think a lot of people can definitely empathize with like the personal, feelings about all of it. I'm sure like a lot of people, especially in art, are like in the same boat. So it's like, and I personally too, like I feel bad for people like that who really just feel like they've maybe wasted time or they just, are out of work all of a sudden or whatever. Like that's a hard, very difficult thing to go through. So like I personally would feel for anybody in that position, but like if you look at it from a, and this isn't to say like, oh, this negates any of those feelings. But if you do look at it from like a more like bird's eye view and like a larger kind of perspective, it's like if you look at the field of just software development, for example, it's like the more things that you can automate, the better. So it's like obviously before if you had people writing really low level code and then they found a way to automate that and now they don't need people to do that anymore, so it's like okay, we've kind of released those resources and now we can use it towards something else. And so obviously from like the business perspective or from like the whatever enterprise perspective or whatever, automating anything is going to be helpful for them like in the long term. But for the people actually involved, the software engineers and stuff, it probably is very very annoying. Yeah, and I relate to that. That's a really difficult, hard thing to go through.
okay, well, that was a great conversation about AI. We have discussed so much from post college, loneliness, the making of friendships, social media, and I feel like we had just a very good conversation. I'm really glad that I got to do this first episode, so I'm gonna clap to us. And it's really been a pleasure talking with you, Shivani. Um, we're going to try to post. We're not going to try to post. We will post once a week. And so I hope to see you guys next week. And Shivani, do you have anything to say?
No, it's been, I mean, yes, it's because I'm talking, but yes, it's been fun. I've definitely enjoyed the conversation as well. To anyone watching us for the first time, thank you very much for tuning in, and I hope to see you all next week.